In the suffocating stillness of the plantation house, the oppressive southern heat seemed to crawl across every inch of the grand estate. The walls of the study, adorned with portraits of men long deceased and displays of family wealth, felt like a prison to Isabella Winthrop. Her father, a man of power and ruthless discipline, sat at his desk, eyes narrowed in thought. The air smelled faintly of ink and leather, but for Isabella, it smelled of something much worse, fear. Isabella was a large woman, her body swollen by years of indulgence and neglect. She had always been the subject of whispered gossip in the house, a constant reminder to those around her of the fragility of the world she lived in. Despite her father's wealth and status, Isabella's size had always been a mark of shame, something she couldn't hide or escape. In a society that prized beauty, grace, and thinness, she was a grotesque anomaly, a thing to be tolerated but never truly accepted. Her father, Mr. Winthrop, had made sure she understood this, often using her weight as a weapon to humiliate her, knowing it would break her spirit, if not her body. Her mind raced with thoughts of the past, memories of harsh words, of painful glares from her father, of how his voice would tremble with disgust when he spoke of her in front of others. His treatment of her had always been cruel, but today, something in his eyes told her it would be worse. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her as she stood there, awaiting his next words, unsure of how to respond to the cold, silent atmosphere that enveloped the room. "Isabella," he finally said, his voice low, dangerous. "Do you know why you're here?" Isabella nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been given any real love or attention from her father, only scorn and condescension. Her mother had passed when she was young, leaving her father to raise her with his strict, unyielding standards. His expectations had always been high, but when it came to Isabella, nothing was ever good enough. And now, as the years had passed, his cruelty had only grown sharper. "You are a disgrace," he spat, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "A blemish on this family's name. You cannot even control your own body, let alone uphold the dignity of this estate. You have become nothing but a burden." His voice trembled with barely contained rage. "But I will give you an opportunity, one last chance to redeem yourself." Isabella blinked, her throat tightening. "Redeem myself? How, father?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will learn humility, Isabella," he declared, standing up from his desk and walking toward her. "You will go to the slave quarters and you will offer yourself to one of them." To Gabriel. Isabella's eyes widened in shock, a rush of panic flooding her veins. "Father, no, I can't do that." Her father's face twisted with contempt. "You will. You have no choice. You think you can hide behind your size, behind your position, but in the eyes of the people who work this land, you are nothing. This is your chance to understand what it truly means to be beneath someone, to feel what they feel. To understand the lives of those you've lived above your entire life." Isabella felt her stomach churn. Her father's cruelty was suffocating, and every word he spoke pierced her like a knife. But she knew there was no escape. She had always been trapped within his rules, his control. If she defied him, there would be consequences far worse than the humiliation he was about to impose. "You will go to him," her father continued, his tone unyielding. "You will offer yourself, and you will learn your place. The plantation is not a place for softness or weakness. If you are to stay here, you will serve those who truly understand what it means to live under the weight of this world." The words felt like an anchor pulling her down into the depths of despair. Her heart raced in her chest as her mind spun with disbelief. She had always been trapped in the gilded cage of her father's expectations, but this was beyond anything she could have ever imagined. Gabriel was a slave, one of the men who worked the fields, whose sweat stained the soil beneath his feet. He was strong, powerful, and free in a way that she could never be. She had seen him from a distance, but never had she imagined that her father would degrade her so thoroughly, so utterly. Gabriel's face floated before her, a mixture of confusion and fear. How could she do this to him? How could she submit to something so degrading, so dehumanizing? "You will do it," her father snapped, as though reading her mind. "Do not make me repeat myself." Isabella nodded numbly, her legs feeling like they were made of lead as she turned to leave the room. Her father's voice followed her, cutting through the air like a whip. "Go to the slave quarters. And remember, this is your only chance to prove yourself worthy of the family name. Fail me, and there will be no place for you here." As she walked down the long corridor, each step felt heavier than the last. Her mind was a swirl of dread, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt so small, so powerless in her entire life. The plantation felt like a prison, and she was its most wretched prisoner. She arrived at the slave quarters just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dirt paths. The smell of the earth, the scent of hard labor, filled her nostrils, and she felt sick to her stomach. Gabriel was working in the fields when she approached, his strong back bent under the weight of his labor. His dark skin glistened with sweat as he worked, his movements graceful despite the hard work. When he saw her, his expression shifted from focus to something unreadable. He straightened, wiping his brow, his eyes scanning her face. "Miss Isabella," he said, his voice respectful but distant. "What brings you here?" She hesitated, her heart thundering in her chest. The words felt like lead in her mouth, and she swallowed hard before speaking. "My father sent me," she said, her voice trembling. "He said, I must offer myself to you." Gabriel stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence. He stepped closer, his gaze flicking over her, not with the lustful desire she feared, but with an unreadable depth of emotion. He had seen her in passing, but this was different. This moment was charged with something else, something she couldn't quite grasp. "You don't have to do this," Gabriel said quietly, his voice soft but firm. "I don't want anything from you, Miss Isabella. Not like this." She blinked, confused. "But, my father said." "I don't care what your father said," Gabriel interrupted, his voice firm now, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "You are not a prize to be claimed. Not by anyone, least of all by someone like me." The words struck her like a revelation. She had never been treated like a person by her father, and certainly not by the people around her. She had always been seen as an object, a tool to be used, a thing to be discarded when it no longer served a purpose. But here, in this quiet moment with Gabriel, there was a flicker of something else. Respect, humanity, something she had never experienced. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she stepped back, her mind racing. What had she been willing to do? What had she been willing to let her father make of her? Gabriel took a step back, his expression softening. "You don't have to. Listen to him. You can choose. You are more than just the body your father sees." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she swallowed them down. This was a turning point, she realized. She didn't have to accept the cruel destiny her father had set for her. In this moment, Gabriel had shown her something more important than obedience, her own power to choose. Without another word, she turned and left the quarters, her heart heavy but her mind clearer than it had ever been. The quiet of the plantation was broken only by the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant calls of workers in the fields. As Isabella made her way back toward the slave quarters the following evening, she felt a strange combination of dread and curiosity swirling inside her. The air was thick with the impending twilight, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the estate seemed to settle into an unnatural silence, as though waiting for something momentous to happen. She had never felt so out of place, so disconnected from the life she had once known. She had spent the day alone in her room, replaying her father's words over and over in her mind. His cruel bargain had seemed impossible to defy, but Gabriel's words, the warmth and compassion he'd shown her, had stayed with her. They echoed through her thoughts, a light in the suffocating darkness of her father's cruelty. What was she doing here? What had she agreed to? What kind of woman had her father turned her into? She paused for a moment at the edge of the path, looking up at the grand house that had been her prison for so long. Her father was inside, no doubt working on his plans for the future, and the rest of the household was engaged in their routines, oblivious to her inner turmoil. Her entire life had been dictated by expectations, by rules that weren't hers to make. The weight of her body, of her existence, had always felt like a burden. A burden her father had never hesitated to remind her of. But now, as she stood on the threshold of the slave quarters, something shifted inside her. She had been given an impossible choice, a twisted test of her worth. She had been used as a pawn, pushed to the brink of humiliation by the very man who should have protected her. Gabriel had treated her with respect, with kindness, something she had not known from her own father in years. Was that not worth something? Was it not worth more than the demeaning role her father had envisioned for her? She drew in a deep breath and walked forward. Each step felt like an eternity as the sounds of the world around her faded away, swallowed by the pounding of her heart. When she reached the small building that housed the slave quarters, she hesitated only for a moment. Gabriel was not in the field this time. The quarters were dimly lit by the flickering of a single lantern, casting long shadows against the walls. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and earth, a stark contrast to the perfumed, carefully manicured atmosphere of the main house. There was no elegance here, no facade. It was raw, real, and unrefined, a world Isabella had never truly experienced but had often imagined. Gabriel was sitting near the back, cleaning his tools. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable, though there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Isabella felt her pulse quicken as his gaze shifted to her. She had never been so close to him, never felt the weight of his presence so acutely. He was no longer just a servant, no longer just someone she passed on the way to her father's study. He was a man, an equal, and somehow, in that moment, she felt both more and less than him at the same time. "Miss Isabella," he greeted her softly, his voice steady, but laced with something that she couldn't quite place. "Gabriel," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She stopped a few paces from him, unsure of what to say, unsure of what had brought her here, and why she had come. I came here because my father, he sent me." Gabriel stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something about his calmness that unnerved her, his stillness in the face of her disarray. He seemed to carry a quiet dignity that was foreign to her world of luxury and manipulation. "You don't have to do this, you know," Gabriel said quietly, his voice rich with compassion. "You don't owe him anything." Isabella looked at him, her chest tightening. "He said I had no choice," she replied, her voice faltering. "He said this was the only way to prove myself. To learn my place." Gabriel's jaw clenched, and his eyes darkened. "Your father is wrong," he said firmly. "You are more than a pawn in his game. He's made you feel small, Isabella, but you are not small. You are not weak." His words stung, but not in the way she expected. They weren't cutting or cruel. They were a revelation, a truth she had never allowed herself to acknowledge, one that had been buried beneath layers of self-doubt and the constant pressure to meet her father's expectations. Isabella swallowed hard, her mind racing. The shame she had always carried, the shame of her body, the shame of her father's treatment of her, began to unravel in the face of Gabriel's honesty. She wasn't just a body to be discarded, a tool to be used for his amusement. She was a person, and for the first time in her life, someone was treating her as such. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to escape from him." "You don't have to escape, Isabella," Gabriel said, his voice softening as he stepped closer. "You just have to choose. Choose what you want. Choose what is right for you, not for him." Isabella stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent her whole life trying to earn her father's approval, living in the shadow of his expectations. Now, in this quiet space with Gabriel, she was being asked to choose for herself. It felt like a weighty decision, one that held the power to change everything. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage she had never known she had. I don't want to be his puppet anymore," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Gabriel nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "You never were. You just let him make you believe that. But you don't have to believe it anymore. You are not a puppet, Isabella. You are a woman, and you deserve respect. You deserve love, and you deserve to choose your own path." Isabella felt something stir inside her, a warmth that began in her chest and spread throughout her body. It was a feeling she hadn't had in years, a feeling of power, of autonomy, of being seen for who she truly was. For the first time in her life, Isabella realized that the path to freedom wasn't about defying her father, though that would come later. It was about seeing herself as more than a burden, more than just a body. It was about finding her voice and standing in it. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Gabriel with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me." Gabriel didn't say anything for a moment, but his eyes softened, and he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The gesture wasn't sexual or predatory. It was comforting, almost protective, a silent promise that he would never see her as her father did. For the first time, Isabella felt safe, not just from her father's cruelty, but from the shame that had shackled her for so long. As the night settled around them, Isabella realized that she had come here for a reason, not because her father had ordered her to, but because she had needed to be reminded that she had a choice. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't trapped. And Gabriel, kind, strong, respectful Gabriel, had shown her that the path to reclaiming her life began with the simple, yet powerful act of choosing to believe in herself. The world outside the slave quarters seemed distant now, its rules and expectations less oppressive. For the first time, Isabella felt like she was standing on the edge of something new, something that was hers to define. She wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but for the first time, she felt like she had the power to decide. As the last of the twilight faded into darkness, Isabella turned to leave, a quiet resolve building within her. The past had tried to define her, to control her, but now, she would no longer let it. She had seen what freedom could look like, even in a world built on cruelty and oppression. And she knew, deep down, that it was hers to claim. Gabriel watched her go, his gaze steady and kind. There were no words between them, but they didn't need any. The bond that had formed between them was something that would last far longer than any words could express. The next morning, Isabella awoke in a fog of confusion, her mind tangled with the events of the night before. She had spent hours lying awake in her room, staring at the ceiling as the weight of what had transpired slowly settled in. Gabriel's words echoed in her mind, not as a harsh reminder of her father's cruelty but as a quiet beacon of hope. She wasn't sure what it all meant yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She could no longer live the way she had. The sound of birds chirping outside her window was the only thing that broke the silence of the estate. The sprawling plantation felt like a vast, unyielding fortress, one that had held her captive for as long as she could remember. But today, the mansion no longer seemed quite so imposing. Today, the shadows of the past seemed less oppressive, and for the first time in years, Isabella felt as though she could breathe. She sat up, her body aching from the tension that had held her the night before. Her mind, though, was clearer than it had ever been. What Gabriel had given her was something precious, something that neither her father nor anyone else could take away. He had shown her a different path, a way to see herself not as an object, a mere extension of her father's will, but as a woman who had choices. Her father's cruelty had tried to define her life, but no longer. She had found something inside herself that would not be silenced. The sound of footsteps outside her door startled her, and she quickly wiped away the tears that had begun to form in her eyes. She couldn't let herself appear weak, not today. Today was the day she would finally stand up for herself. The knock on the door came again, more insistent this time. Isabella took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and opened it. Standing there was the housekeeper, Mrs. Abbott, her face stern as always. "Miss Winthrop, your father requests your presence in the study," she said without so much as a glance in Isabella's direction. There was no warmth in her voice, no empathy, only the cold professionalism that had come to define the way the household operated. "Now, if you please." Isabella felt a wave of anxiety wash over her, but she didn't let it show. She nodded, her jaw tightening with determination. "I'll be there shortly," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. Mrs. Abbott gave a curt nod and turned to leave, her heels clicking on the wooden floor as she made her way back down the hall. Isabella took one last look at herself in the mirror, smoothing the fabric of her dress, and made her way down to the study. She knew her father well enough to understand that today would not be an easy conversation. The events of the previous night had shifted something between them, and she wasn't sure how he would react. When she entered the study, her father was sitting behind his desk, his posture rigid, as always. The dim light of the early morning filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. He looked up from the papers he was reviewing, his eyes narrowing as they fell on her. He seemed to be waiting for something, though Isabella wasn't sure what. "Sit," he commanded, his voice low and commanding. Isabella hesitated for a moment but then obeyed, lowering herself onto the chair across from his desk. Her hands rested nervously in her lap, and she tried to steady her breath. Her heart was racing, but she wouldn't let her father see it. She had made a decision, and she was going to follow through with it. "You were gone for quite some time last night," her father began, his tone casual, but there was a hint of something darker behind his words. "I trust you did as I asked." Isabella swallowed hard, but she looked him in the eye. "I did," she said quietly. Her father's gaze sharpened, and he leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "And what did you learn, Isabella? Did you learn your place?" The question felt like a slap across the face, but Isabella refused to flinch. Her thoughts were steady now, clear and unwavering. "I learned something, father," she said slowly, her voice steady. "But it wasn't what you think." For a moment, her father stared at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice laced with impatience. "I learned that I don't have to live according to your rules," Isabella said, her words slow but deliberate. "I don't have to live as you want me to. I'm not a thing to be controlled, not a body to be shaped by your desires." Her father's face twisted in anger, his eyes darkening with rage. "What insolence," he muttered under his breath, before raising his voice. "You think you can defy me, Isabella? You think you can walk away from the life I've given you? You are nothing without me, nothing without this family." Isabella's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "I am something, father. I am more than you ever gave me credit for. I am a woman with my own will, my own desires, and my own future." Her father stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet room. "You are nothing without me," he repeated, his voice louder now, full of venom. "I made you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. By rejecting everything I've done for you." Isabella's pulse raced as the words echoed in the room. She had spent her whole life trying to please him, trying to earn his approval, but it had never been enough. And now, for the first time, she realized that his approval meant nothing. It was a hollow thing, built on cruelty, manipulation, and control. She wasn't going to play the part of the dutiful daughter anymore. "I don't need your approval anymore," she said, her voice calm, though every word felt like a triumph. "I've spent my life trying to earn it, and for what? To be belittled, to be treated like I am nothing more than a pawn in your game. No, father, I won't live like that anymore." Her father's face flushed with fury, but Isabella didn't look away. She could see the anger burning in his eyes, the wrath of a man who had always controlled her. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get the words out, Isabella stood up abruptly, her hands gripping the edge of the desk for support. "You think I'm weak because of my body, father. You think I'm just a thing to be used. But I'm not," she said, her voice trembling with the force of her words. "I am more than what you made me believe. And I won't let you define me anymore." Her father's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you can just walk away from me, from this family? You think you can defy me and not face the consequences?" His voice dropped to a low growl. "You'll regret this, Isabella. You'll regret turning your back on everything I've given you." Isabella's breath quickened, but she stood tall. "I may regret things in my life, father, but this is not one of them." For a moment, there was silence between them, thick and suffocating. Isabella's chest was tight, but she didn't break her gaze. She had never been more sure of anything in her life. Gabriel had shown her a different way to live, a way that was based on respect and humanity, not control and fear. She had chosen a new path for herself, and nothing her father said could change that. Her father's face darkened, and he took a step toward her, his presence looming over her. "You think you can just walk away, Isabella? Think again. You'll have no place in this world if you refuse to follow my rules. I will make sure of it." Isabella's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. "I don't need this world, father. Not if it means I have to live by your rules. I'll find my own way." For the first time, she felt free. The weight of her father's power over her seemed to evaporate, leaving her standing tall in the face of his wrath. She turned and walked toward the door, her body trembling with the rush of defiance. As she stepped out into the hallway, she heard her father's voice rise behind her, but it was distant now, fading away like an echo. Isabella walked down the corridor, her steps steady, her heart strong. The plantation had never felt so small, so insignificant. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew one thing: she was no longer his prisoner.